She was standing in a $12,000 wedding gown when she heard her fiancé tell another woman he had never loved her. Not a whisper. Not a rumor. His actual voice, 3 feet away, separated from her by nothing but a silk curtain and 6 years of her life. Evelyn Cross did not cry. She did not scream. She stood perfectly still, her hands pressed flat against the cold mirror, watching her own reflection slowly change into someone she had never met before, a woman who was done being used. If you are watching this and already feeling your heart pound, you're exactly where I need you. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this story has 5 chapters, and every single one will leave your jaw on the floor. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And trust me, you do not want to miss what Evelyn does next. The fitting was supposed to be the best morning of her life. That was what everyone kept telling her. Her mother had said it on the phone that Tuesday. Her publicist had said it over coffee. Even the driver who took her across Manhattan to the Maison Alara bridal salon on 5th Avenue had glanced at her in the rearview mirror and said, "Big day, huh?" with the easy warmth of a stranger who assumed she was happy. Evelyn had smiled and nodded. She was good at that. She had been smiling and nodding for 6 years. Maison Alara was not the kind of place that advertised its prices. The kind of women who came here already knew what things cost, and they came anyway. The front door was frosted glass and brushed brass. The interior smelled of white flowers and money, a combination Evelyn had learned to stop noticing. The owner, a Belgian woman named Claudette, greeted her personally and led her past walls of fabric swatches and photographs of women who looked like they had never once doubted themselves. Evelyn doubted herself constantly. She just hid it underneath good posture and the right shoes. The gown had been custom designed over 4 months. Ivory silk, architectural at the shoulders, a silhouette that was elegant without being cold. Lucian had not picked it. Evelyn had, because she was the one with taste in their relationship. She was the one who understood that the right image, deployed at the right moment, was worth more than any contract. She had applied that understanding to herself for years. She had applied it to him. Claudette guided her into the private fitting suite, a large room at the back of the salon separated from the main floor by a heavy curtain of raw silk in pale gold. Inside, 2 assistants waited with the dress. Evelyn stepped out of her coat, handed her bag to one of them, and let them work. The dress went on slowly. It always took time, these things. All those tiny buttons running down the spine like a ladder. She stood in front of the 3-panel mirror while the assistants pinned and adjusted, and she looked at the woman standing there and tried to feel something clean. Something that matched what the morning was supposed to be. She felt tired instead. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that lives in the back of your skull and doesn't go away no matter how long you sleep. "The train needs dropping 2 centimeters on the left," Claudette said softly, kneeling beside her. "You've lost weight since the last fitting, Evelyn." "I've been busy." "You're always busy." Claudette looked up at her, and there was something careful in her expression. "Are you eating?" "I'm fine." That was another thing she was good at saying. She was standing very still while Claudette worked on the hem when she heard the door to the suite open and close quietly. Not the main door, the secondary entrance at the back, the one that led to the private consultation room where clients sometimes brought their partners to review orders or settle final payments. She heard a man's voice first. Low, controlled. The voice of someone who had trained himself to take up exactly as much space as he chose, no more and no less. She had fallen in love with that voice. She had trusted it in the dark for 6 years and never once thought to question what it said when she wasn't there to hear it. Lucian Moretti said, "She suspects nothing." Evelyn stopped breathing. Claudette, still kneeling, did not look up. The 2 assistants were at the far end of the room with their backs turned, folding tissue paper. Nobody in the world except Evelyn seemed to register that 3 words had just rearranged the entire architecture of her existence. The silk curtain between the fitting suite and the consultation room was not soundproof. It had probably never needed to be. "She doesn't know?" That voice was younger, familiar. It belonged to a person Evelyn had trusted differently, not with her heart, but with her calendar, her correspondence, her schedule, the daily mechanics of her professional life. Leah Mercer. 26 years old, sharp, quick, pretty, in the way that some people are pretty without realizing they're using it. Evelyn had hired her 3 years ago because she had reminded her of herself at that age. Hungry, focused, trying to prove something. She had mentored her. She had promoted her. She had brought her into every room that mattered. "She knows what I let her know," Lucian said. "That's always been the arrangement." "And after the wedding?" "After the wedding, nothing changes. She runs the public side. She's perfect at it. You've seen her. The investors love her. The press loves her. She makes me legitimate." A brief silence, a sound that might have been a glass being set down. "You and I continue exactly as we have been. And the baby?" The word hit Evelyn somewhere below her ribs. She felt her body trying to respond, a contraction of the diaphragm, the beginning of a sound, and she stopped it. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and she breathed through her nose, slow and silent, and she stood absolutely still inside a $12,000 dress, while the world she had built for 6 years dissolved without making a sound. "The baby stays private," Lucian said. "I'll take care of it financially. I'll take care of you financially. You understand that, don't you? Nothing changes for you." "You promise me more than that." Leia's voice had shifted. There was something raw in it now, something that might have been love, or might have been fear, or might have been both at once, the way those things so often are in women who have been told they are special by men who are careful with their words. "And I'll keep those promises after things settle." "After things settle," she repeated it flatly. "That's what you always say." "Leia." His voice dropped lower, and Evelyn recognized the tone immediately because it had been used on her dozens of times. That particular register of authority, pretending to be tenderness. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Yes," Leia said, quietly. The way people say yes when they don't quite believe the word but have already decided to keep saying it. Claudette had finally looked up. She was watching Evelyn's face with the careful attention of someone who understood that something was happening but had not yet decided what to do about it. Her hands had gone still on the hem. Evelyn looked at her own reflection. The woman in the mirror was wearing an ivory gown with architectural shoulders and a train that needed dropping 2 centimeters on the left. She was pale. Her jaw was very tight. Her eyes were dry. That surprised her, the eyes being dry. She had expected to cry. She had always assumed that if this kind of thing happened, if the absolute worst version of the thing she had sometimes let herself half imagine actually came true, she would break apart. She had imagined it going loud, tears and glass and the sound of her own voice going wrong. Instead, she felt something cold moving through her chest, something slow and deliberate and entirely unfamiliar. It took her a moment to recognize it as clarity. She did not look away from the mirror. She reached very carefully into the small pocket hidden in the side seam of the gown. Claudette had put it there at her request, because Evelyn had learned years ago to always keep her phone close. And she pressed the recording button on the voice memo application she had opened that morning for an entirely different purpose, to capture the final notes Claudette had for the dress. Her hand did not shake. She was quietly astonished by that. Her hand did not shake. In the consultation room, Lucian was still talking. He had moved on to specifics now, timelines, financial arrangements, the logistics of maintaining 2 lives in the same city without the infrastructure collapsing. He was thorough. She had always admired that about him. He was the most thorough person she had ever known, which was one of the reasons she had trusted him completely, which was one of the reasons he had found it so easy to do this. She listened, she memorized, she recorded every word. When they finished and the back door opened and closed again, the silence that followed was total. Claudette remained on her knees. The 2 assistants were still at the far end of the room, and Evelyn understood from their posture that they had heard too, and had made the professional calculation to disappear inside their task until the moment resolved itself. "Claudette," Evelyn said. Her voice was perfectly level. That was the part that would stay with her afterward, the impossible steadiness of her own voice in that moment. "Yes?" The Belgian woman looked up at her. 70 years old, and she had seen everything, Evelyn thought. She had watched hundreds of brides stand in this room. She knew what women looked like when they were happy, and she knew what they looked like when they were destroyed. And right now she was looking at a face she probably hadn't seen before. "I need you to finish the hem exactly as planned. I'll pay the final balance today. Claudette was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Of course. And I need to borrow your office for 20 minutes. It's yours." She stepped off the fitting platform carefully because the dress was still pinned. She walked to the back of the suite, past the golden curtain, past the door that Lucian and Leia had used, and into Claudette's small private office. She closed the door behind her. She sat down in the chair in front of the desk. She stopped the recording. She played it back. His voice, her voice, every word. She sat there and listened to the evidence of 6 years of her life being dismantled, and she thought about what she was going to do next, not whether. What? That distinction was everything. She had been in difficult rooms before. She had negotiated contracts while grieving. She had presented to investors the morning after her father died. She had learned a long time ago that the women who survived were not the ones who felt the least. They were the ones who refused to let their feelings make their decisions for them. She was going to let herself feel every single thing Lucian Moretti had just done to her. She was going to feel it completely and without apology. But not yet. Not now. Now she was going to think. She opened her phone and called a number she had not dialed in 8 months. It rang twice. Rebecca Vale? The voice on the other end was flat, professional, and completely without warmth. Rebecca Vale was a corporate attorney who specialized in tearing apart companies and the powerful men who built them. She had a reputation in Manhattan that other lawyers described in hushed tones, the way people describe weather systems. You either got out of her way or you got leveled. She and Evelyn had met at a foundation dinner 4 years ago and had maintained a cautious professional friendship since, the kind built less on affection than on mutual recognition. 2 women who understood that the world preferred them to be decorative. 2 women who had decided not to be. "Rebecca," Evelyn said, "I need you. Are you available this week?" A brief pause. "How serious?" "The most serious conversation I have ever initiated." Another pause. Shorter. "My office, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. "Thank you." She ended the call and sat quietly for a moment. Then she pulled up Lucian's contact card and sent him a text message. She kept it simple. Something about missing him and the wedding feeling so close now. She used a heart emoji because she knew exactly what he expected from her. She had been managing his expectations for 6 years. She was going to manage them for 3 more days. That evening, she returned to the apartment on Park Avenue that she and Lucian shared. It was a beautiful apartment. He had designed the common space. She had chosen everything else. The result was a home that looked like a magazine feature and felt, on some level, she had always pushed down, like 2 different people trying to coexist in the same square footage without quite meeting. Lucian was in the kitchen when she arrived, opening a bottle of wine. He was wearing a charcoal sweater, and he looked, as he always looked, like a man who understood exactly what impression he was making. He was 52, lean in the way men are lean when physical appearance is part of their professional presentation, with dark hair gone silver at the temples and the kind of face that read as powerful in photographs and almost warm in person. Almost. "There she is," he said, smiling. "How was the fitting?" "Perfect," she said. She set her bag down. She walked to the kitchen island and accepted the glass of wine he poured for her. She looked at him across the marble counter. He looked back. He had no idea. She could see that. The confidence of a man who has never been caught exists in the body differently from ordinary confidence. It occupies the space around a person, a kind of invisible ease. He had that ease completely. He had probably had it for years while she stood beside him and thought it was meant for her. "You look tired," he said. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine." She took a sip of wine. "I made the final payment today, for the dress." "How much?" She told him. He nodded the way he always nodded about her expenditures, with a faint, tolerant approval that she had once found charming and now recognized as something else entirely. The approval of a man who considers himself the final authority on every number that passes through a shared life. "It'll be worth it," he said. "You'll look extraordinary." "I always do," she said. Something in her tone made him pause for just a fraction of a second. She saw it, the microscopic recalibration behind his eyes. He was a careful man. He paid attention to registers. But then he decided she was complimenting herself, and he laughed softly, and the moment passed. She smiled at him. It was the most dangerous smile of her life, and he had absolutely no idea it was happening. That night she lay awake in the dark next to him while he slept with the untroubled heaviness of a man without a conscience, and she stared at the ceiling, and she did not cry, and she planned. She went through everything she knew about Lucian's business, which was considerable, because she had been his most trusted social architect for 6 years, and she had absorbed information the way careful people always do, not all at once, but in layers, each piece connecting to the next, without her ever quite deciding to map it. She knew his investors by first name. She knew which partnerships were performing and which were straining. She knew the names of the companies he kept outside his main portfolio, the ones he described vaguely when she asked and then changed the subject. She had always accepted the subject changes. She wouldn't be accepting them anymore. There was something else underneath the affair. She didn't have proof of it yet, but she had been living beside this man for 6 years, and she had the instincts of someone who had built a successful business from nothing, which meant she trusted patterns, and the pattern she had been half seeing for the last year and willfully refusing to look at directly was telling her that Lucian Moretti's empire was not what it appeared to be. Not all of it. Maybe not most of it. She closed her eyes, opened them again. The ceiling was still there. Lucian was still breathing beside her, slow and deep, completely unbothered. 3 days, she thought. She had 3 days before the wedding. She had spent 6 years helping him build something that was going to destroy her. 3 days was enough time to take it apart. She was wrong about that, as it turned out. Not about whether she could do it, but about how deep the thing went and how much worse it was than she had imagined lying in the dark on a Tuesday night. She would find that out tomorrow, sitting across from Rebecca Vale in an office 34 floors above Fifth Avenue, when the forensic investigator Rebecca had on retainer pulled up the first financial record, and the number on the screen was so large that Evelyn had to put her water glass down before she dropped it. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she lay still, and she breathed, and she built the architecture of her response in the silence of a life she was already in the process of leaving. The man beside her never stirred. He was sleeping next to a woman who had already decided to destroy him. He just didn't know it yet. The office of Rebecca Vale occupied the northeast corner of a glass tower on Fifth Avenue, 34 floors above the street, and it looked exactly like the woman who owned it, precise, undecorated, and quietly intimidating. No artwork on the walls, no plants. A single photograph on the credenza behind the desk showed Rebecca standing on a mountain somewhere cold, alone, facing away from the camera. Evelyn had always found that photograph telling. Rebecca Vale did not perform for anyone, not even in her own personal spaces. It was 6:58 in the morning when Evelyn arrived. The receptionist showed her to a conference room where coffee had already been set out. Black, no sugar, Rebecca had remembered. Evelyn sat down, wrapped both hands around the mug, and waited. Rebecca walked in at exactly 7, carrying a legal pad and wearing a gray suit that looked like it had been pressed in the middle of the night. She was 55, lean-faced, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes the color of wet concrete. She sat down across from Evelyn without preamble or pleasantries and opened her legal pad to a blank page. "Talk," she said. So Evelyn talked. She played the recording first. She set her phone on the table between them and pressed play and watched Rebecca's face while Lucian's voice filled the room. Rebecca did not react the way most people reacted to something like that. She did not wince. She did not look away. She listened the way surgeons listen to symptoms, with total clinical attention, cataloging each word for its utility. When it ended, Rebecca wrote something on the legal pad. Then she looked up. "How long have you been with him?" 6 years. "Engaged how long?" 14 months. "You have commingled assets?" "Some. I kept most of my business finances separate. Cross Design Collective is entirely mine." "Smart," Rebecca wrote again. "What do you know about his other companies? The ones outside the main portfolio?" Evelyn told her. She went through everything she had organized in her head the night before. The shell company names she had heard mentioned once and never again. The investor meetings she had been excluded from with explanations that hadn't quite tracked. The time she had asked a direct question about a specific financial arrangement and watched Lucian redirect with the casual fluency of a man who had been redirecting his whole life. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When Evelyn finished, she put her pen down. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "Stay here." She was gone 11 minutes. Evelyn drank her coffee and stared at the city below the window and did not let herself think about Leah Mercer, because if she started thinking about Leah Mercer right now, she would feel the grief before she had built the strategy, and she could not afford that order of operations. The grief would come. She knew that. It was waiting somewhere behind her sternum, like weather that hadn't arrived yet. She was going to have to let it in eventually, but not yet. Rebecca came back with a man Evelyn had not met before. He was mid-40s, unremarkable looking in the way that certain extremely competent people are unremarkable, medium height, forgettable face, the kind of person who moves through rooms without snagging anyone's attention. He carried a laptop and a slim leather folder. "This is Daniel Cho," Rebecca said, sitting down. "Forensic financial investigator. I've used him for 9 years. He is completely confidential." Daniel nodded at Evelyn once and opened his laptop without speaking. He had clearly already been briefed because he went directly to what he needed to show her. "I pulled public filings on Moretti's listed companies last night after Rebecca called me," he said. His voice was flat and informational, the voice of someone who had learned to deliver catastrophic news without inflection, because inflection only made it harder for the people receiving it. Standard stuff like annual reports, partnership disclosures, SEC filings, where applicable, and I found inconsistencies. "What kind?" "The kind that don't exist by accident." He turned the laptop to face her. "This is a shell company registered in Delaware 18 months ago. Moretti Development LLC is listed as an indirect investor through 2 intermediary entities. The money flowing through here," he tapped the screen, "doesn't match any of the legitimate project revenues he's reported publicly. It's too large. It's also moving in a pattern that isn't consistent with real estate development timelines." Evelyn looked at the number on the screen. She picked up her coffee cup and set it down again before she could drop it. "How large?" Rebecca asked. Daniel said the number out loud. The room was very quiet afterward. "That's not an affair," Evelyn said. "No," Rebecca agreed. "It's not. He's been laundering money." Neither of them confirmed it out loud because they were lawyers and investigators, and they didn't confirm things they couldn't yet fully prove. But Daniel turned the laptop back toward himself and pulled up a second document, and then a third, and the picture that emerged across the next 40 minutes was the picture of a man who had constructed something vast and careful and illegal underneath the legitimate architecture of a career that Evelyn had spent 6 years helping to build and protect. She sat very still through all of it. She was thinking about the charity gala 2 years ago, where she had personally introduced Lucian to the deputy director of a major investment fund, and had watched Lucian absorb that introduction like oxygen and turn it into a partnership within 60 days. She was thinking about the press profile in a national financial magazine, where she had been quoted describing Lucian as one of the most ethical businessmen she had encountered in her career. She was thinking about the investors who had come to her specifically because they trusted her, and who had trusted him because they trusted her, and what that meant now. She had not just been his disguise, she had been his credibility engine. She had been the reason legitimate money had moved toward him, which had given the illegitimate money somewhere to hide. "Evelyn?" Rebecca's voice was careful. "Are you all right?" "No," she said, "but that's not the question right now." Rebecca looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. It was the closest thing to respect Evelyn had ever seen on her face. "What's the question right now? How do we take him apart completely? Not just the affair, not just the criminal exposure. All of it. I want the whole structure gone." Daniel and Rebecca exchanged a brief look. "That's going to take more than 3 days," Daniel said. "I know, but the wedding gives me an angle that goes away in 3 days. Tell me how to use it." They worked for 4 more hours. By the time Evelyn left Rebecca's office, she had a plan that was still incomplete and partly improvised and carried a significant number of risks that Rebecca had outlined with the unflinching detail of someone who needed her clients to understand exactly what they were walking into. But it had a spine. It had a logic. And at the center of it was a legal mechanism that Rebecca had identified in the existing marriage contract documents, a morality clause that Lucien himself had insisted on including 18 months ago, when a competitor's marriage scandal had briefly tanked the competitor's stock, and Lucien had decided that legal protection against reputational contamination was simply good business. He had built a trap and put his own name on it. Rebecca had nearly smiled when she found it. Almost. There was one piece of the plan that Evelyn had not discussed with Rebecca yet, because it was the piece she wasn't sure about. The piece that kept surfacing in her mind with the particular weight of things that are both necessary and likely to hurt you in the process. Laia. She drove to Laia's apartment on West 83rd Street at 2 in the afternoon. She did not call ahead. She did not text. She had Laia's address because she was Laia's employer and had been for 3 years, and she sat in the car outside the building for 7 minutes before she got out, which was 6 minutes and 50 seconds longer than she normally would have needed. The lobby attendant called up. A long pause from upstairs. Then the elevator light came on. Laia opened the apartment door herself. She was wearing an oversized cream sweater and no makeup, and she looked younger than Evelyn had ever seen her look, and she looked like someone who had not slept, and she looked, for just a fraction of a second before the professionalism or the fear or both slammed down over her expression like a shutter, like someone who had been dreading this exact moment for a very long time. "Evelyn?" Her voice was barely anything. "Can I come in?" A pause. Then she stepped back. The apartment was nice, better than it should have been on Laia's salary, which Evelyn noted without surprise and without letting it show. She sat down on the couch without being invited to, because she was not here to observe social niceties. Laia remained standing near the kitchen island with her arms crossed over her body in the posture of someone bracing for impact. "I was at the bridal salon yesterday morning," Evelyn said. Laia went completely white. "The curtain isn't soundproofed," Evelyn said. "I heard everything." The silence that followed was the kind that has physical weight. Laia's mouth opened and closed, her arms tightened around herself. She started. "Don't apologize yet," Evelyn said. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because I need to understand something, and I need you to be honest with me, and I think you might actually want to be honest with someone right now, even if that someone is me." Laia looked at her. Her eyes were filling, and she was fighting it, pressing her lips together hard. "How long?" Evelyn asked. The question landed. Laia closed her eyes briefly. 2 years, she said. "Almost 2 years. 2 years." Evelyn absorbed that, processed it, filed it in the part of her mind that was collecting evidence rather than processing emotion. "He approached you?" "Yes. At the office Christmas party, the first year I worked for you." She opened her eyes. They were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. She was holding herself at the very edge of it with what looked like considerable effort. "He was—" She stopped. Started again. "You know how he is." "I know exactly how he is," Evelyn said. "That's why I'm sitting here instead of falling apart somewhere." Something shifted in Laia's expression. The professional distance that had been in it cracked slightly. "He told me it was complicated between you two," Laia said, "that you were more business partners than anything else, that you'd grown apart. And you believed him." She exhaled hard through her nose. "I wanted to. That's different, and I know that, and I'm—" Her voice broke on the last word, and she stopped and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. "How far along?" Evelyn asked. Laia looked at her. "The baby," Evelyn said. 11 weeks. Evelyn nodded slowly. 11 weeks. Far enough to be certain. Far enough that this was not an abstraction. "Does he know the exact date?" she asked. "Yes." "Has he said anything to you about how he plans to handle it publicly?" Laia was looking at her now with the particular expression of someone who is slowly realizing that the person across from them is operating on a frequency they haven't fully tuned into yet. There was something almost fearful in it that had nothing to do with Evelyn and everything to do with the shape of the conversation. "He said it would stay private," Laia said carefully, "that he would support us financially, that after the wedding, when things settled—" "After things settled," Evelyn repeated, the same phrase she had heard through the curtain. She wondered how many times he had used it, how many different women, How many different conversations? How many instances of that specific combination of words deployed to buy exactly the amount of time he needed? Did he specify what settled means? A timeline? A plan? The silence answered the question. Leia unfolded her arms. She sat down on the arm of the chair across from the couch, which put her lower than she had been standing and made her look suddenly exhausted in the full-body way that pregnancy exhaustion looks on a person who has been trying to hide it. He hasn't been specific, she said. No, he wouldn't be. Evelyn, he's been using both of us, Evelyn said, not with anger, with the flatness of a fact being stated. You gave him something I couldn't give him, which was escape. A place where he didn't have to be the person he was building. And I gave him something you couldn't give him, which was respectability, legitimacy, the kind of reputation that takes years to construct and that money alone can't buy. She paused. Neither of us was his partner. We were his infrastructure. Leia was staring at her. Her face had gone through several things in the last 30 seconds and had landed somewhere that looked like devastation. But it was a specific kind. The kind that comes not from being hurt by the enemy, but from finally seeing the situation clearly enough to understand your actual position in it. What are you going to do? Leia asked. Her voice was very quiet. What I should have done before I let him get this far. Evelyn reached into her bag and removed a small envelope. She set it on the coffee table between them. There's a card inside with Rebecca Vale's number on it. She's an attorney. She's already involved in this matter. If you decide you want protection, real protection, not the kind Lucian offers, you call her. Leia looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. And if I don't? She asked. Then you continue to depend on a man who described you to me 2 years into your relationship with him as the other arrangement. Evelyn stood up. She picked up her bag. I heard him say that too, yesterday. He didn't use your name. She watched that land. She watched Leia Mercer sit with the information that the man who had told her she was special had described her, in private, without the warmth he deployed for her benefit, as an arrangement, an administrative category, a line in a plan. Leia reached out and picked up the envelope. The drive back across the city took 40 minutes in afternoon traffic, and Evelyn sat in the back seat and looked out the window and let herself feel, for exactly those 40 minutes, everything she had been holding in a locked room in her chest since she had heard Lucian's voice through the curtain the day before. She felt the full depth of the betrayal, not just the affair, not just the fraud, but the sustained and deliberate performance of love that he had maintained in her direction for 6 years, while building a completely different set of plans inside the same life she thought they shared. She felt the specific grief of realizing that the person she had believed she was helping was not real. That the man who had stood in the kitchen last night and called her extraordinary was a construction. That she had given years of her genuine self to something that had never existed. She felt it completely and without looking away from it. Then the car pulled up to the apartment building on Park Avenue, and she thanked the driver and she got out, and she walked inside and she became again the woman who was 3 days away from the most important move of her career. The second night was easier than the first, not because the pain was less, but because she had something to do with her hands now. She worked at the desk in the spare bedroom, while Lucian watched television in the other room, going through the legal documents for their prenuptial arrangement with the focused attention of someone who has stopped reading for sentiment and started reading for weapons. She found the morality clause on page 17. She read it 4 times. Then she called Rebecca. I found it, she said. I know, Rebecca said. I found it this morning. Here's the problem. The clause as written applies to conduct that becomes public before the wedding, which means we need the exposure to happen before you walk down the aisle, not after. I know. That means the timeline is extremely tight. I know that too. Evelyn. A brief pause. If we do this wrong, he walks away, not to prison, not to ruin. He walks away with his lawyers, and you walk away with a settlement and an NDA and a career that has his fingerprints all over it. What do we need to make it airtight? More financial documentation. Daniel needs access to internal records, not just public filings. We need a source inside his operation. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I might have one, she said. The next morning, 36 hours before the wedding, Leah Mercer called Rebecca Vale's number. Evelyn was in a meeting when she got Rebecca's text confirming it. She read the message once, set her phone face down on the conference table, and continued the meeting for another 20 minutes without letting anything show on her face. Afterward, alone in her office, she let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 3 days. Leah had access to things Evelyn didn't. She had been inside Lucian's private life in ways that went beyond what Evelyn had witnessed. She had seen the other phone, the one he kept in the inner pocket of his jacket and never charged in front of Evelyn. She had been in rooms where documents were discussed that never made it into the official file systems. She had absorbed information the way people do when they are trusted precisely because they are assumed to be contained, assumed to be silent. She was done being silent. Over the next 18 hours, Leah sent 3 batches of photographs to Rebecca Vale's secure server. Messages between Lucian and business associates that described financial movements in language careful enough to be technically ambiguous and specific enough to be damning in context. Photographs of documents she had seen in his home office during nights when Evelyn was traveling for work. A voicemail, saved and never deleted, in which a man Evelyn didn't recognize confirmed a transfer amount that matched one of the figures Daniel Cho had identified in his forensic analysis. Daniel worked through the night. Rebecca worked through the night. Evelyn sat in the spare bedroom of the apartment she shared with Lucian Moretti and coordinated everything via encrypted messages while the man himself slept 8 feet away on the other side of a wall, completely unbothered, dreaming whatever it was men like him dreamed. By 4 in the morning, with 18 hours to go before the wedding, they had enough. Not everything, not the complete picture, but enough to act, enough to initiate, enough to pull the thread and watch the whole structure shudder. Rebecca sent her a final message at 4:17 a.m. 4 words. "We can move now." Evelyn set her phone down on the desk. She looked at the window. Outside, the city was that particular shade of not quite dark that belongs to the hours when most people are asleep, and the ones who are awake are either suffering or building something. She thought about the dress hanging in the closet of the master bedroom, ivory silk, the train that needed dropping 2 centimeters on the left, a dress she had chosen because she believed she was choosing a future. She thought about the woman in the mirror at the bridal salon, pale, jaw tight, eyes dry. She thought about what Lucien had said to Laya, with the easy confidence of a man who had never once imagined the woman he was discussing might be listening. She suspects nothing. She picked up her phone and typed back to Rebecca. "Tomorrow. Not tonight. I have one more thing I need him to sign." Because there was one move left before the board cleared. One final, perfect move that Lucien Moretti himself had made possible, in his arrogance, in his thoroughness, in his absolute certainty that the woman he had spent 6 years engineering into the right shape would continue holding still while he arranged the rest of her life without her knowledge or consent. He had asked her 3 weeks ago to review additional corporate documentation for their joint holdings going forward, agreements that restructured certain asset protections in anticipation of their marriage. He had handed them to her with the casual authority of a man who does not expect to be read carefully. She had set them aside. She had not yet signed. Tomorrow night, at dinner, she was going to present them back to him. Modified. Rebecca had spent the last 36 hours embedding language into the supplementary agreements, language that, read in isolation, looked like standard protective boilerplate, and that, read in combination with the morality clause and the evidence they now held, created a legal architecture that would allow his company's board to immediately challenge his control position the moment his conduct became public. He was going to sign documents that would end his empire. He was going to do it with a good pen, over a nice dinner, smiling at the woman he thought he had completely under his control. And the moment that pen left the paper, there would be no version of the next 24 hours that did not end with Lucien Moretti losing everything he had spent his life building. No negotiation, no settlement, no quiet dissolution with NDAs and careful press statements, just the full weight of what he had built, falling directly onto the person who built it. Evelyn turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she got up and walked to the kitchen and drank a glass of water, standing at the counter in the pre-dawn silence of the apartment that had never quite felt like home. And she thought about the dinner she needed to arrange, and the dress she would never wear, and the conference room she had already quietly reserved in Lucian's own building for the morning after. She thought about everything that was about to happen. And for the first time in 3 days, she felt something that was almost, not quite, but almost, steady. The pen was already on the table. All she had to do was hand it to him. The dinner reservation was at 8. Evelyn made it herself, at a restaurant on the Upper East Side called Marin. Dim lighting, leather banquettes, the kind of place where powerful people conducted sensitive conversations because the ambient noise level was calibrated to prevent eavesdropping and the staff had been trained to disappear between courses. She and Lucien had eaten there a dozen times. He liked the lamb. He liked the way the maitre d' knew his name. He liked, she understood now, any room where he was recognized as the most important person in it. She spent the morning at Cross Design Collective, her studio on West 21st Street. She sat in her glass-walled office and handled calls and reviewed proofs and answered emails from vendors who didn't yet know the wedding they were supplying was already over. And she did all of it with the focused competence of someone who has learned that the best disguise available to a person under extreme pressure is simply to keep working. Her senior designer, a quiet Georgian man named Arash, brought her coffee at 10 and looked at her the way people look at something they're not sure is stable. "You good?" he asked. "Always," she said. He didn't believe her, and she knew he didn't believe her, and neither of them said anything further about it, which was the precise texture of a professional relationship that had been built over 7 years on mutual competence and careful emotional distance. Rebecca called at 11. "Daniel finished the third pass," she said, without greeting. "The number is confirmed. We're talking about $42 million moved through 6 shell entities over 4 years. The pattern is consistent with structured placement, breaking large sums into smaller amounts to avoid reporting thresholds, then cycling them through the real estate projects as investment capital. It comes out the other side looking like legitimate development revenue." Evelyn was quiet. "The federal exposure on this," Rebecca continued, "is significant. Wire fraud, potentially conspiracy. The SEC will have questions about the investor funds that came in through legitimate channels, because some of those people were investing in projects that were partially capitalized by dirty money without their knowledge." "People I introduced him to," Evelyn said. "Yes." A silence. "Rebecca, am I exposed?" A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "Not criminally. You had no knowledge and there's no paper trail connecting you to any of the financial mechanics. But reputationally, you're the person who vouched for him. To a lot of people who are now going to lose money." "I know." "Evelyn, I know," she said again. "We move forward anyway, tonight. The documents are ready?" "Everything is embedded exactly as we discussed. The language is invisible unless you're looking for it with the specific context of the morality clause, and he won't be looking for it because he's never once believed he needed to read anything you hand him carefully. Send me the final version. I'll have them printed here." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she opened the file Rebecca had sent and read every word of it one more time, slowly, with the particular attention of someone who understands that a single wrong syllable in the next 24 hours could collapse everything she had built. The documents were perfect. Rebecca Vale did not produce imperfect documents. At 3 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. Then she saw the first 3 words visible in the preview, and her stomach dropped through the floor. She opened the message. It was from Laya. "He knows something is wrong. He called me this morning. He asked if I had spoken to you. I said no. He didn't believe me. Evelyn, he has someone watching your building. I saw the car when I left this morning. Black sedan, same plates as yesterday. I'm scared. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." Evelyn read it twice. Then she stood up and walked to the window of her office and looked down at West 21st Street. Midday foot traffic, a delivery truck double parked, a woman walking 2 large dogs, a black sedan parked at the far end of the block with its engine running. She stood very still and looked at it for a long time. It didn't move. She turned away from the window and called Rebecca. "He's running surveillance on me," she said the moment Rebecca picked up. "Leia tipped me. Black car outside my office. She says same plates were outside her building this morning." Rebecca was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "He's suspicious, but he's not certain. If he was certain, he wouldn't be watching. He'd be acting." which means we have a closing window, which means we move tonight exactly as planned and we do not deviate. Can you get to dinner without being followed? I'll use the building's back entrance and take a car I haven't used before. Do that. And Evelyn, don't tip him at dinner, not even a degree. He cannot know anything has changed until those documents are signed. I know how to do this, Evelyn said. I know you do. I'm saying it anyway. She dressed for dinner in the apartment because arriving from elsewhere would have broken the routine Lucian expected. She put on a navy silk dress and her good earrings, and she stood in the bathroom doing her makeup with steady hands and looked at herself in the mirror with the remote, appraising attention of someone preparing for a performance. She was. That was exactly what this was. One final performance for an audience of one who had spent 6 years performing for her. Lucian arrived at the apartment at 7:15. He was wearing a dark suit and he smelled like his usual cologne, and he kissed her cheek in the entry hall the way he always did. And Evelyn felt the kiss land on her skin and registered it the way you register a weather report, as information, not sensation. Ready? He said. Almost. She turned back toward the bedroom. I have some papers for you to look at tonight. I want to settle the last of the asset documentation before tomorrow. A pause. Brief. The kind that lasts a quarter of a second and contains a person deciding something. Sure, he said. Bring them along. They sat in the back of his car together and made the kind of conversation that people make when they are both pretending, easy and surface level, about the weather and the restaurant and whether they should take 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the honeymoon. Evelyn said 3 weeks. She said she had always wanted to spend more time on the Amalfi Coast. She smiled when she said it. He put his hand over hers on the seat between them, and she let him. His hand was warm. She had always thought of his hands as warm. She looked out the window at the city moving past and thought about absolutely nothing except the next 3 hours and what needed to happen inside them. Marin was half full when they arrived. The maitre d' used Lucian's name and showed them to the corner table, say, the best table, the one with sightlines to the whole room and its back to the wall, the one Lucian always preferred because he liked to see every entrance. She sat across from him. The leather of the banquette was cool against her bare arms. They ordered. He got the lamb. She ordered something she already knew she wouldn't be able to eat. The conversation moved through the easy rituals of a dinner between two people who had shared hundreds of them. He talked about a property deal that was moving toward close. She asked the right questions. He filled the glass of wine that arrived and lifted his in the small gesture that meant he was going to say something sentimental, which he did. Something about tomorrow, about beginning, about how the last 6 years had been the foundation for everything that came next. She raised her glass. She held his gaze. She said, to everything that comes next. He believed every word of it. She could see that. She could see that completely, and it was, she thought, the most useful and most devastating thing she had ever understood about the man sitting across from her, that he had made a fundamental error about the nature of people who are good at managing themselves. He had looked at her composure and her control and her warmth, and he had concluded that underneath those things was a woman who could be directed, who could be contained, who would continue being useful as long as she believed she was loved. He had never once considered that the qualities he was exploiting were precisely the qualities that would make her dangerous. The papers came out over dessert. She had timed it carefully, late enough in the meal that he was comfortable, a glass and a half of wine in, the particular looseness of a man who has navigated an evening successfully and feels the approach of completion. She set the folder on the table and slid it across. Final asset protections, she said. Rebecca wanted them executed before the wedding, so there's no ambiguity going forward. He opened the folder. He looked at the first page with the attention he always gave legal documents. A sweep, not a read. He was not a details man on paper. He had lawyers for details. When Evelyn put something in front of him, he trusted her to have reviewed it, because she was thorough, and because trusting her was convenient, and because it had never once cost him anything. He reached the signature lines. He looked up at her. All standard? He said. Everything Rebecca drafted, she said. Nothing we haven't discussed. He clicked the pen she had placed beside the folder. She watched his hand move across the first signature line, then the second, then the initialing on page 4, page 9, page 17. He moved with the brisk efficiency of a man signing something that doesn't matter, which was exactly what he believed this was. He closed the folder and slid it back across to her. "Done," he said. He picked up his wine glass. "Tomorrow, we get married." "Tomorrow," she said. She put the folder into her bag. Her hands were completely steady. They were in the car going home when her phone buzzed in her lap. She angled the screen away from Lucian with the practiced ease of someone who manages her own communications, which she always had, and which he had never questioned because it was simply part of how she operated. The message was from Rebecca. "Daniel flagged something 30 minutes ago. Call me the second you're alone. It's important." The specific word choice told her something was wrong. Rebecca Vale did not use the word important unless she meant critical. She texted back, 1 hour. The ride home took 22 minutes. Lucian talked about the honeymoon again. She responded at the right intervals. The city outside was lit up and moving and looked exactly like itself. Inside the apartment, he opened another bottle of wine, which she declined, and he made a comment about needing to be sharp for tomorrow, which she agreed with. And by 10:15, he was in the bedroom, and by 10:40, his breathing through the wall had taken on the slow regularity of sleep. She waited 10 more minutes. Then she went to the spare bedroom, closed the door softly, and called Rebecca. Rebecca picked up on the first ring. That alone told her something. "Talk to me," Evelyn said. Daniel was running a secondary pass on the shell company documentation when he found a discrepancy in the ownership chain for one of the entities. Rebecca's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something Evelyn had not heard from her before. A tightness. The sound of someone managing their own reaction. The Delaware LLC that anchors the largest cash flow, the one we traced 42 million through. It has a secondary registered agent that doesn't match the rest of the structure. Meaning someone else set it up, or someone else co-owns it, and Daniel needed another hour to trace the secondary agent's connection, so I didn't have the full picture until 40 minutes ago. A brief pause. "Evelyn, the secondary registered agent on that company is a law firm called Bauer Shell Associates." Evelyn waited. The name meant nothing to her. "Bauer Shell is a shell firm itself," Rebecca said. "It dissolved 18 months ago, but before it dissolved, it represented a single client in New York for a period of about 4 years. "Who?" Another pause, though this one was different. This one was Rebecca finding the exact words for something she clearly did not want to say. "Cross Design Collective," Rebecca said. "Before you retained your current legal team, Bauer Shell handled your business incorporation and your first 3 years of trademark filings." The room was very quiet. Evelyn's mind went to work immediately, the way it always did under pressure, so not panicking, processing, building the shape of what she was being told. "He used my old law firm to establish the shell company. The timing suggests he started setting up the structure within 6 months of meeting you, before you were together, before he knew whether you'd actually be useful to him." Rebecca's voice was very careful. "Which means either he had a connection to Bauer Shell independently, which is possible, or he targeted me from the beginning," Evelyn said. The silence that followed had a particular quality, the quality of a truth that has been spoken out loud for the first time and cannot be put back. She sat with it. She made herself sit with it fully. Not just the betrayal of the last 6 years, not the affair, not the fraud, but the longer thing. The thing that went back further than she had known to look. The possibility that the man who had walked into her life 6 years ago and fallen in love with her, or what she had believed was love, or what she had built her entire understanding of the last chapter of her life around, had walked toward her deliberately, had chosen her not because of anything between them, but because of what she had, what she represented, what she could be made to provide. Not love that went wrong. Never love. Architecture from the beginning. "There's more," Rebecca said. "Tell me." Bauer Shell's dissolution was connected to a regulatory investigation 4 years ago. Small case, limited press coverage, but Daniel found it. One of the firm's principals, a man named Warren Shell, was questioned in connection with a financial fraud case that was ultimately settled without criminal charges. The investigation involved a real estate developer from New Jersey. Rebecca paused. That developer had a business relationship with Lucian Moretti going back 9 years. 9 years, 4 years before Evelyn, 3 years before Lucian had arrived at the gallery opening where they had met and introduced himself, and said, with the easy warmth she had immediately trusted, that he had been wanting to meet her for months. She had thought he meant weeks. She had thought it was romantic. "He's been building this for nearly a decade," she said. "It looks that way." She stood up from the desk. She didn't remember deciding to stand. She was just suddenly on her feet, moving to the window, looking out at the city that was going about its ordinary nighttime business, entirely unaware of what was happening in this room. "Rebecca, the documents he signed tonight. Still valid, still exactly what we need them to be. This new information doesn't change the legal strategy. If anything, it strengthens the narrative of premeditated conduct." A brief pause. "But Evelyn, I have to ask you something." "Ask it." "Is there anything in your history with him? Any decision you made, any introduction, any financial arrangement, anything at all, that you made because he steered you toward it? That at the time seemed like your choice, but might have been something he engineered?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn thought about 6 years. She moved through them methodically, the way you move through a building checking for structural damage, not skimming, going room by room. She thought about the investor she had introduced him to at the Metropolitan Club luncheon in their second year together, a man she had known for a decade, who had subsequently committed $12 million to a Moretti development project. She thought about the profile she had arranged in a financial quarterly, the one that had legitimized him in circles that had previously found him suspect. She thought about the charity partnership she had suggested, the one that had put Lucian's name alongside established philanthropists and given him the last piece of respectability he had needed to move into the upper tier. She thought about who had suggested each of those things, who had introduced each idea as her own, who she had believed was listening to her when she spoke about her professional relationships and absorbing the information only because he loved her. "Yes," she said, "probably. I don't know how much. We'll need to go through all of it, together, before tomorrow. Tomorrow is in 7 hours. "I know." "Rebecca." She pressed her fingers against the cold glass of the window. "Does this change what we do?" A long pause, the longest Rebecca had given her in any of these conversations. "No," Rebecca said finally. "It doesn't change what we do. It changes why it's necessary." Another pause. "He didn't just use you, Evelyn. He built an operation around you. You were load-bearing. Every legitimate thing about his empire, you were the reason it stood up." She closed her eyes. "Which means," Rebecca continued, and her voice was very quiet now, "that when it falls, it's going to fall loudly. And some of the debris is going to land near you. I need you to be prepared for that." "I'm prepared." "Are you?" She opened her eyes. The city outside was still there, bright and indifferent and moving. "I have been building things since I was 24 years old," Evelyn said. "I have lost clients and contracts and money, and I have rebuilt every single time. I know what it costs to start over." A pause. "I also know what it costs not to." "All right." Rebecca's voice settled. "Come to my office at 5 a.m. We have work to do." She ended the call. She stood at the window for another minute. Then she turned and looked at the room, the desk, the lamp, the documents she had placed in an ordered stack, the careful architecture of the next 12 hours laid out in front of her. She had come into this with a plan that she had believed was nearly complete, a structure built on documented evidence, legal strategy, and the fundamental arrogance of a man who had never once imagined she was capable of fighting back. What she understood now was that the structure she had been dismantling was far older and far deeper than she had known, that she had not been a woman who made a mistake about a man. She had been a woman who had been selected, approached, cultivated, and built into the foundation of something criminal before she ever had the chance to see it for what it was. That knowledge changed the weight of everything. It also changed what she was going to do in the conference room tomorrow morning. This was no longer about protecting herself from a betrayal. This was about dismantling something that had used her name and her reputation and her relationships as its operating structure for nearly 6 years, and doing it so completely that nothing of it remained standing. She was going to walk into that room not as a woman exposing the man who had hurt her. She was going to walk in as the only person alive who understood the full architecture of what Lucian Moretti had built, because she had been inside it, because she had been part of it, because she knew every load-bearing wall and every hidden weakness, and every place where a single piece of evidence applied with precision would bring the whole thing down. She went to the desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She began writing the presentation she was going to deliver in 7 hours. In the conference room on the 14th floor of a building that bore the name of a man who had chosen her as a tool and forgotten, fatally, that tools can be turned. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. Methodical, thorough, no sentiment and no performance. Just the clean accumulation of what she knew and what could be proven, and what the people in that room would need to understand in order to make the decisions she needed them to make. At 2:47 in the morning, she printed the final document. She read it from the first page to the last. She found 2 places where the language could be sharper and made the corrections. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the silence of a life she was about to burn to the ground. Through the wall, Lucian was still sleeping. She could hear nothing from his room, but she knew the quality of his sleep. Untroubled, full, the sleep of a man who had never once in 9 years of calculated destruction lost a single night to conscience. Tomorrow, he would lose everything else. She picked up her phone to set an alarm for 4:15, and that was when she saw the second message from Laya, sent 40 minutes ago while she had been on the phone with Rebecca, while she had been absorbing the full depth of what had been done to her. She opened it, and the plan she had spent 3 days building cracked straight down the middle. Laya's message was 4 sentences long. He came here tonight, after dinner. He knows about Rebecca. He took my phone and went through it, and I couldn't stop him. Evelyn, he saw the photographs I sent. He saw everything. Evelyn read it 3 times. Each time the words arranged themselves into the same meaning, and the meaning did not change no matter how many times she processed it. The plan was blown, not cracked, not compromised at the edges. Blown open from the center, the way a structure fails when the load-bearing element goes. Not gradually, but all at once, the whole thing becoming rubble in the space between 1 second and the next. She stood up from the desk so fast the chair rolled back and hit the wall. She was already dialing Rebecca before she was fully on her feet. Rebecca answered in 2 rings. It was past 3 in the morning, and she answered in 2 rings, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. Laya's been compromised, Evelyn said. He went to her apartment tonight. He went through her phone. He has the photographs. A silence. Short and absolute. How long ago? Message came in 40 minutes ago. I was on the other call. Is she safe? I don't know. She sent 1 message and nothing since. I'm calling her. A brief pause. Evelyn, listen to me. If he saw those photographs, he knows we have the financial records. He doesn't know what we've done with them yet, but he knows we have them, and he knows you're not walking into tomorrow blind. Another pause, shorter, which means he's been awake for the last 40 minutes making his own calls. The implication landed immediately. He'll try to move assets. That's what I'd do. Get money out of reach before the exposure hits. Rebecca's voice had gone to its flattest register, the one that meant she was operating on pure function. I'm calling Daniel right now. If Lucian starts moving funds tonight, we need to flag it immediately and get it in front of the right people before markets open. What do I do? You do not let him know you know. Not yet. Can you do that? Evelyn looked at the wall between the spare bedroom and the master. 8 feet of plaster and insulation between her and a man who had spent 9 years building an empire on her name, and who was right now either sleeping or sitting in the dark on the other side of that wall, doing exactly what Rebecca said he would do. Yes, she said. Stay in that room. Don't go to him. Don't change anything he can observe. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of the spare bedroom and breathed. In through the nose, count to 4, out through the mouth. The technique she had learned in her 30s during a period when the business was hemorrhaging money, and she had taught herself not to let the hemorrhage show on her face, because showing it would have accelerated it. Panic was a resource drain. She had never been able to afford it. She couldn't afford it now either. She texted Leia. Are you all right? Where are you? No response. She texted again. Leia, I need to know you're safe. The minutes moved. 12 of them. She counted them without meaning to. The way you count things when the alternative is standing inside the full weight of what is happening and letting it crush you. Rebecca called back at 3:21. Laya is okay, she said immediately. I reached her. He didn't hurt her physically. He took her phone and went through it, and when he found the photographs, he left. She said he was very calm. She said that was the part that scared her most. Evelyn knew exactly what that meant. She had seen Lucian calm. She had mistaken it for stability for years. Now she understood it for what it was. The specific stillness of a man who processes threat by contracting inward, removing everything visible while he calculates. He's moving, Rebecca said. Daniel is already seeing activity on 2 of the shell company accounts. Small movements right now, but the pattern is consistent with preparation for larger transfers. He's staging it. How long before he can get the money out of reach? Depends on where he's moving it. If it's domestic, we can flag it, potentially freeze it with the right filing. If it's going offshore, a brief pause. We lose it, possibly permanently. What do we need to do? I've already drafted an emergency filing. I have a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We've worked together before. I can get this in front of him tonight, but Evelyn, the moment I make that call, this becomes federal. It stops being our operation and starts being theirs. We lose control of the timeline. Do it. There's a cost to that. The press element, the public exposure you plan for tomorrow morning, that may get folded into a federal process that moves on its own schedule, which could mean months before anything is public, which could mean Lucian's lawyers find ways to shape the narrative before you get to. Rebecca. She kept her voice level with the effort of someone holding a door shut against pressure from the other side. If he gets that money offshore, does the rest of it hold? The morality clause, the board challenge, the documents he signed tonight? The documents he signed are still valid. The board challenge can still proceed. But without the financial evidence being frozen and secured, his lawyers will argue the criminal allegations are unproven, and some of the board members who would otherwise move against him will hesitate. So we need the money frozen. Yes. Then make the call. A pause. Something in Rebecca's breathing shifted. Not relief exactly, but the sound of a decision being confirmed by the right person. All right. But Evelyn, you need to not be in that apartment when this breaks. I don't know how Lucian responds when he understands what's actually happening. I need you somewhere else. She looked at the wall again. I'll leave in an hour, she said. I need to get my files. 1 hour. Then you're out. She ended the call and stood very still for a moment, organizing the next 60 minutes into a sequence she could execute without deviation. Her go-bag was in the bottom of the spare bedroom closet. She had packed it 2 days ago because she had understood even then that the apartment might become a place she needed to leave quickly. Laptop, documents. The original recording from the bridal salon backed up in 3 separate locations. The signed folder from tonight's dinner, which was in her bag by the door. She moved quietly. The apartment was thick with nighttime silence, and she moved through it the way she had learned to move through difficult things, without announcement, without hesitation, one action at a time. She was lifting the go-bag from the closet when she heard the door to the master bedroom open. She turned around. Lucian was standing in the doorway of the spare bedroom. He was wearing a dark shirt and trousers, which meant he had not been sleeping. He had been dressed and sitting in the dark on the other side of the wall while she made her calls. And the realization of that, the image of it, him sitting there listening to the sounds of her moving and her voice low on the phone, moved through her like cold water. He looked at the bag in her hands. Then he looked at her face. Going somewhere? He said. His voice was completely calm. That was the thing she had to hold on to, that she had been told it would be calm, that the calm was not safety, that the calm was the most dangerous version of him. I couldn't sleep, she said. I was thinking about going to the studio for a few hours. At 3:30 in the morning. I work odd hours when I'm anxious. You know that. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the thing it did when he was processing. Very still, very even, the surface giving away nothing while something moved behind it. I got a call tonight, he said. She waited. She made herself wait without filling the silence, because filling silence was a tell, and she had been managing her tells in front of this man for 6 years. Old associate of mine. Said someone had been pulling financial records on my companies. Third-party request. Came through a forensic firm. He paused. You wouldn't know anything about that. Not a question, the syntax of a question with the weight of a statement. I've had Rebecca reviewing our joint asset documentation, she said. In preparation for the wedding, that's standard. Rebecca Vale doesn't do standard work. She's thorough. That's why I use her. He took one step into the room, just one, but the geometry of the space changed when he did. The distance between them contracted and the exit behind him grew more relevant. Leia called me, he said. Evelyn kept her face exactly where it was. Not a muscle, not a breath. She was upset, he continued. She'd had a difficult evening. She mentioned she'd been in contact with you. She works for me. She said you came to see her at her apartment. Another pause. 2 days ago. She's been managing wedding logistics. I needed to discuss some scheduling issues with her in person. He looked at her. The calm on his face had a quality she was identifying for the first time. It was not the absence of emotion. It was emotion that had been compressed into something very small and very hard and very controlled, and it was sitting directly behind his eyes, and she could see it now the way you can sometimes see a current under still water. Evelyn, he said. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had before. Quieter, like something being put down carefully before being thrown. What did Leia tell you? He said. She told me about the scheduling conflict for the rehearsal dinner seating, Evelyn said. She was worried about the placement of the Hartwell group. A silence. Then he crossed the room. He moved fast, not lunging, not violent, but with the sudden decisiveness of someone dropping a pretense they no longer need. And he took the bag from her hand, not snatching it, just closing his hand around the strap and pulling with enough force that she either let go or got into a physical contest she would lose, and she let go because her instincts had already run the calculation before her mind caught up. He set the bag on the desk. He unzipped it. He looked inside. He saw the laptop, the document folders, the external hard drive she had packed. He looked at her. This isn't about scheduling, he said. She said nothing. How long have you known? He asked. The performance was over. She could feel it ending the way you feel a stage light going off. A shift in the quality of the air, something that had been operating dropping away. She stood in the spare bedroom of an apartment she had lived in for 4 years and looked at the man she had loved, or believed she had loved, or built her life around the structure of loving, and she let the performance go. Since the fitting, she said. Something moved across his face. Fast and then gone. The salon. The curtain isn't soundproofed. He put both hands on the desk and leaned on them. He was looking at the go bag. His jaw was very tight. She watched the muscles working there and thought, with the strange peripheral clarity that extreme situations sometimes produce, that she had watched that jaw tighten hundreds of times over 6 years and had always read it as stress, had never once read it as danger. What have you done? He said. Not a question this time either. She said nothing. He turned to look at her. Evelyn, what have you done? What I needed to, she said. He straightened up. He was taller than her by 5 inches, and he used those 5 inches now without quite deciding to, the way people use physical presence when the conversational options are running out. The documents tonight, at dinner. She watched his face as he worked through it. She watched the specific moment he understood what had been embedded in what he signed. Not the whole of it, probably, not the precise legal mechanism, but enough. She watched him understand that he had been maneuvered, and she watched the understanding arrive in his face as something that looked, for just a fraction of a second, almost like recognition, like a man confronting a version of his own methods used back on him. Then it hardened. You have no idea what you're touching, he said. His voice was very low. You think this is an affair. You think this is a divorce negotiation. I know exactly what it is, she said. You don't. He took a step toward her. The people connected to my business. They are not the kind of people who accept interference. They are not the kind of people you expose and then walk away from. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand that you're scared, she said. The word landed. She watched it land. His face contracted. "I'm trying to protect you," he said. And the audacity of it, after everything, the sustained audacity of that particular sentence, sent something clean and cold through her chest. "No," she said. "You're trying to protect your assets. I stopped being a person to you a long time ago." She held his gaze. "Maybe I never was." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read. Not quite anger, not quite desperation, something that occupied the space between them, something that might have been, in a different man, a version of grief. Then he picked up the go bag and walked to the bedroom door and stood in it, blocking it. "You're not leaving tonight," he said. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She had not taken her jacket off. She had not taken it off specifically because the phone was in it. And she had known, on some level she hadn't let herself articulate, that this conversation might happen. She slipped her hand into the pocket. He saw it. "Put the phone on the desk," he said. She looked at him. "Evelyn." The calm was thinning. She could hear it, the compression cracking slightly, something harder and less controlled beginning to surface beneath it. "I'm asking you to put the phone on the desk and sit down and have a conversation with me like two adults who have been together for 6 years and who are not going to destroy everything they've built because of what?" she said. Silence. "Say it," she said. "Because of your affair? Because of the $42 million you moved through 6 shell companies? Because of Warren Shell and the firm you used to build a structure around my business before you even introduced yourself to me?" She watched his face go through several things very quickly. "Which part are we not going to let destroy everything?" He was very still. "How much do you know?" he said. And this time the voice had changed. The calm was gone, and what replaced it was something quieter and more frightening, the specific register of a man recalculating from scratch. "Everything," she said. "Not everything about everything, but enough. And it's already in front of people you can't call off." He looked at her for a long time. The go bag hung from his hand. The blocked doorway was still blocked. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. He looked at the screen. Something in his face shifted, a contraction, sharp and involuntary. And he took the call, turning half away from her, and she heard a man's voice on the other end, rapid and low. And she heard Lucien say, "When?" And then she heard him say, "How many?" And the quality of his stillness changed into something else entirely. He ended the call. He set his phone on the desk beside her go bag. He looked at her. "There are federal agents outside this building," he said. The statement was delivered flatly, without accusation now, without the performance of control. Just a man stating a fact about the coordinates of his own destruction. "Yes," she said, "you called the FBI." "Rebecca did." "On my instruction." He nodded slowly. The motion had something strange in it. Not defeat exactly, but a man absorbing the specific shape of the trap he was in, the way you absorb the dimensions of a room you can't leave. He set the go bag on the floor between them. He stepped out of the doorway. She picked up the bag. She put the strap over her shoulder. She walked to the doorway and stopped. "The conference room is booked for 8 a.m., she said. "Your investors will be there, your board members, the people who trusted me and who you borrowed that trust from." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I'll be there too." He said nothing. He was standing in the middle of the room, looking at nothing she could see, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen there before. Something unguarded and without calculation, something that might have been fear and might have been the specific exhaustion of a performance that has finally run to its end. She walked out of the spare bedroom. She walked through the apartment she had lived in for 4 years. She picked up her bag from by the door, the one with the dinner folder in it, the signed documents, the pen still clipped to the outside. She opened the front door. The hallway was empty. The elevator was waiting. She stepped inside. She pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. She rode down alone in the clean silence of the elevator and looked at her reflection in the mirrored doors. And the woman looking back at her was wearing the same navy dress from dinner, and her hair was still right, and her face was unreadable, and her hands were completely, inexplicably steady. Outside the building, the night air hit her. September, cooling toward autumn. The particular smell of New York at 4 in the morning that is somehow different from New York at any other hour. Sharper, more itself. A black SUV was parked across the street with two figures visible in the front. Further up the block, another. Rebecca was standing on the sidewalk 10 feet from the building entrance, wearing a coat over what appeared to be the same suit from yesterday, holding a coffee cup and a legal folder with the particular uprightness of a woman who has been awake for 24 hours and has decided not to let her body know about it. She looked at Evelyn, one long look, taking inventory. "You all right?" she said. "He knows everything," Evelyn said. "He knows about Rebecca, the filings, the federal contact, all of it." "I know, that's why I'm standing here and not in my office." She handed Evelyn the coffee cup. It was still hot. It also means he spent the last hour trying to do damage control instead of sleeping, which means he's going into the next 4 hours on adrenaline and desperation, and people on adrenaline and desperation make mistakes. She paused. "Did he sign?" "Yes." Something in Rebecca's face settled. "Then we have everything we need. The federal piece is moving. They'll execute this morning. The board meeting stands. You still want to be in that room at 8? Evelyn looked up at the building. 14th floor, the conference room she had reserved 3 days ago. The room where she had decided, lying awake next to a man she no longer recognized, that the end of his empire needed a witness. "Yes," she said. "Then we have 3 hours." Rebecca turned toward the waiting car. "Let's use them." They drove through the empty pre-dawn streets of Manhattan, the city going past the windows like film, and Evelyn drank the coffee and looked at nothing and thought about the conference room and the faces that would be in it, and the presentation she had spent the last 3 hours finishing, and the specific things she was going to say when she stood at the head of that table. Not the legal language, not the financial documentation. Those would speak for themselves. She was thinking about the first sentence, the one that preceded all the evidence, the one that would establish, before a single document appeared on the screen, what this was and who was standing there and why. She had been trying to find it for 3 days. The right first sentence. The one that was true without being performance. The one that carried the actual weight of what had been done and what she had done in response. She thought she had it now. The car moved through the darkness toward morning, and the coffee was hot, and the city outside was beginning, just barely, at the very edges of the eastern sky, to lighten from black to the deep gray blue that means dawn is coming, whether anyone is ready for it or not. In 4 hours, Lucian Moretti was going to walk into a room and discover that the woman he had spent 9 years engineering into the perfect instrument of his ambition had spent the last 72 hours becoming the most dangerous person in his life. In 4 hours, every person in that room was going to understand what had been done to them, and who had done it, and who had been the reason it had worked for as long as it had. In 4 hours, Evelyn Cross was going to stand at the head of a table and speak the truth out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear it. And the truth was going to land the way truth lands when it has been withheld for a long time and finally arrives. Not like a revelation, but like a wall coming down, and everything that was behind it suddenly, irrevocably, in the light. She was not afraid. That was the thing she kept returning to as the car moved through the pre-dawn city. She had expected fear. She had expected the particular cold terror of the irreversible. But what she felt instead, sitting in the back of a car with a corporate attorney who had not slept, and a cup of coffee, and the signed documents of a man's undoing in her bag, was something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like herself, completely and without modification, for the first time in 6 years, entirely and unapologetically herself. The car pulled up outside Rebecca's building. They got out. The doorman held the door. The elevator carried them up 34 floors in silence. Rebecca's conference room at 4:47 in the morning smelled like cold coffee and printer toner and the particular charged air of a space where important things are about to be decided. Daniel Cho was already there, his laptop open, 3 monitors arranged in a row showing financial data that scrolled with the quiet urgency of something still moving. He looked up when they came in. "Asset freeze is confirmed on the primary accounts," he said. "He moved about 800,000 before the flag hit. We couldn't stop that piece. Everything else is locked." 800,000 out of 42 million, Rebecca said. "Yes. He can keep the 800,000, Evelyn said. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the presentation. "Let's go through this one more time." They went through it. Every document, Every financial record, every message and photograph and transfer amount, and shell company structure and date and name. They went through all of it with the methodical attention of people who understand that the difference between justice and almost justice is the single detail you didn't verify. At 7:15, Evelyn excused herself and went to the bathroom at the end of the hall and ran cold water over her wrists and looked at her face in the mirror. The navy dress was still right. Her hair needed attention, and she fixed it with the small kit she carried in her bag. She looked at her eyes. They were clear. They were tired, and they were clear, and they looked, she thought, like the eyes of a woman who had made every decision available to her and was standing at the end of them. She went back to the conference room. At 7:50, they took the elevator down and crossed the street to Moretti Tower. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel, with Lucian's name on it in letters 2 feet tall, and Evelyn walked through its lobby without looking up at those letters, because she was done looking up at anything that bore his name. The security desk called up. The elevator came. They rose to the 14th floor. The conference room door was closed. Through the glass panel beside it, she could see figures already seated, board members, investors, faces she recognized, people she had introduced to this man and vouched for and brought into rooms and whose trust she had been, without knowing it, the mechanism for transferring. She put her hand on the door. Beside her, Rebecca said quietly, "You ready?" Evelyn looked through the glass at the room full of people who were about to have their understanding of the last several years restructured entirely, who were about to discover what had been done with their trust, who were about to look at a woman they knew primarily as Lucian Moretti's fiancé and understand for the first time exactly who she actually was. "Yes," she said. She opened the door. The room looked up, and Lucian Moretti, sitting at the far end of the table with 2 lawyers flanking him and the specific expression of a man who has spent the night preparing his defense, met her eyes across the length of the room, and she watched him understand, fully, finally, completely, that he had miscalculated everything about her, from the very beginning, and that the miscalculation was going to cost him the empire he had spent 9 years building on her name. She walked to the head of the table. She set her laptop down. She connected it to the presentation screen. She looked out at the room, and she said the first sentence. The first sentence she said was not about money. It was not about shell companies or wire transfers or the $42 million that had moved through 6 fictional entities over 4 years. It was not about the morality clause or the document signed over lamb and good wine at a restaurant that knew his name. She looked at the room, at the board members and investors and lawyers and the 2 federal agents standing near the back wall in their quiet, unremarkable way. And she said, "I want to start by telling you what I knew and what I didn't know, because that distinction is going to matter to every person in this room before we're finished." The room was very still. Lucian at the far end of the table did not move. His 2 lawyers flanked him like architecture. His face was composed in the careful way of someone who has decided that composure is the last territory he controls, and he was going to hold it for as long as physics allowed. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at the room, and she began. She went through it in order, not chronologically, not the way a legal brief goes, building from foundation to conclusion, but the way a person tells the truth when they have decided to tell all of it, which is from the inside out. She started with what she had believed. She described the 6 years with the flat honesty of someone taking inventory of a house after a fire. Here is what was real. Here is what I thought was real. Here is where the difference lived and what it cost. She did not perform grief, and she did not perform strength. She simply spoke, and the room listened with the particular quality of attention that assembles itself when people understand they are in the presence of something they are going to remember. Then she moved to the evidence. Daniel ran the presentation from the side of the room. The first image on the screen was the shell company registration. The second was the financial flow chart. The $42 million mapped through its 6 vessels, traced by forensic analysis from source to destination, color-coded in a way that made the movement visible even to people who didn't read financial documents for a living. She walked through each entity. She named dates. She named amounts. She connected each movement to a specific project that had attracted legitimate investment, and she said, clearly and without euphemism, what that meant for the people in this room who had made those investments. She heard someone at the table draw a sharp breath. She did not stop. She showed the messages. She showed the photographs Leia had sent, not the personal ones, not the ones that belonged to the private wreckage of a private betrayal, but the document photographs, the ones showing records and communications that connected Lucian to the financial structure, the ones that placed him unambiguously inside the operation rather than adjacent to it. She showed the connection to Warren Shell and to Bauer Shell Associates and to the 9-year timeline that predated her by 3 years. And then she said the hardest part. My reputation was used as the mechanism of trust, she said. The people in this room who invested in Moretti development projects did so in part because I vouched for this company and for the man running it. I did that in good faith. I did not know what I was vouching for. She paused. That does not diminish the cost to you. I understand that. And I am telling you now because you deserve to know it before anyone else, and because you are going to have decisions to make in the next several hours that you should make with full information. The room was silent for a long time after she stopped. One of the investors, a man named Gerald Hartwell, 68 years old, silver-haired, the kind of patrician Manhattan money that had been in the same families for 3 generations, looked down the table at Lucian and said, "Is any of this untrue?" Lucian's lead lawyer started to speak. Hartwell held up one hand without looking away from Lucian. "I'm asking him." Lucian looked at Gerald Hartwell. Then he looked at the room. Then he looked, briefly, at Evelyn. And she saw it again. That thing she had seen in the apartment at 4 in the morning, that unguarded flicker beneath the surface, the thing that in a different man might have been something redeemable. In him, it was just exhaustion. The exhaustion of a performance that has run past the point where the performer has anything left. My lawyers will be responding to the specific allegations, he said. That's not what I asked, Hartwell said. Silence. Gerald? One of Lucian's lawyers put a hand on the table. This is not the appropriate forum to... I have $11 million in his projects, Hartwell said. His voice was very quiet. The quietness of someone who has decided not to raise their voice because raising it would suggest the situation is out of control, and he was not going to allow the situation to be out of control. I will determine the appropriate form. He looked at Lucian one more time. Then he looked at the 2 federal agents at the back of the room. Then he stood up and began gathering his papers. When Hartwell stood, 2 other board members stood. Then a 3rd investor. The movement had the quality of a tide. Not dramatic, not loud, just the steady and irreversible withdrawal of people who have recalculated and made their decision. Lucian watched it happen. His face did not break. She would give him that. Whatever else he was, he did not break in front of the room. He sat at the far end of the table and watched the architecture of everything he had spent 9 years building begin its visible collapse. And he kept his face arranged in the composure of a man who has decided that is the one thing left he can control. One of the federal agents moved forward from the wall. He spoke briefly to Lucian's lead lawyer, too quietly for the room to hear. The lawyer's expression shifted. He leaned toward Lucian and said something. Lucian nodded once, the way you nod when you have understood a thing you do not want to have understood. He stood. He looked down the table at Evelyn. She had expected anger. She had prepared for anger. The specific, focused anger of a man who has been exposed by someone he believed was entirely in his control. She had steeled herself for it across the last 3 days as the thing that would be hardest to stand inside without flinching. What she got instead was different. He looked at her for a long time, and his face was composed, and the composure was real, and then he said quietly enough that only the people nearest him could hear, "You were better at this than I gave you credit for." She said nothing. He held her gaze for another second. Then he turned and walked with his lawyers toward the door where the federal agents were waiting, and the room parted for him the way rooms part for people who are leaving under circumstances that nobody wants to be adjacent to, and he walked through it without looking back, and the door closed behind him. The room breathed. Evelyn stood at the head of the table and let it settle around her, the breathing of a room full of people processing something large. And she looked at the presentation still visible on the screen, the color-coded flowchart of $42 million and 9 years of deliberate construction, and she felt something release inside her chest that she had been holding since the moment she pressed the record button in the fitting room at Maison Alara. It was over, not finished. Nothing like this is finished when it ends. The legal proceedings would run for months. The federal investigation would take longer. The civil suits that Hartwell and the other investors would file would layer on top of those and extend the timeline further still. Rebecca had already told her this. In the careful, thorough way, Rebecca told her everything, making sure she understood that the morning in the conference room was not the end of anything so much as the beginning of the end, and that the beginning of the end had its own demands. But the part that had been hers to do, the part that had begun in a fitting room with a silk curtain and a voice she recognized, that part was over. She had done it. It had cost her things she was going to be counting for a long time. And it was done. Rebecca appeared at her elbow. She said nothing. She just stood there, and her presence had the quality of a person who understands that some moments don't need language. After a while, Evelyn said, "What happens now?" "Now the federal process takes over the criminal piece. The board will move to challenge his control position by end of business today. Hartwell will lead that. The asset freeze holds pending investigation." Rebecca paused. "Your exposure is clean. I've already prepared a statement for your publicist. We're recommending you release it this afternoon, before the press gets the federal filing." "What does it say?" "The truth. What you knew. What you didn't. What you did when you found out." She paused. "In your own voice. I've drafted the framework, but you should rewrite it. It should sound like you." "All right." Evelyn. Rebecca was looking at her with the concrete gray eyes that had looked at her across a conference table at 7 in the morning 4 days ago and had not wavered once in the interval. "You should go home, sleep. You've been running on nothing for 3 days." "I don't have a home right now," she said. It was said plainly, without self-pity, just as information. "You have an office," Rebecca said. "You have a couch in that office. I know because I've been there." A very small pause. "Go there. Close the door. Let Arash handle whatever needs handling for the rest of the day. You've earned the next 8 hours." She took a car to West 21st Street. The studio was quiet when she arrived. It was not yet 10 in the morning, and her team moved through their work with the focused calm of people who had learned to take their professional cues from her, which meant they registered her arrival and did not make it into an event. Arash brought her coffee without being asked and set it on her desk and left without speaking. She sat in her office and looked at the space she had built over 12 years, the clean lines of it, the work on the walls, actual work, pieces from current projects, nothing decorative. She had designed this space with the same logic she applied to everything: strip away what is performed and keep what is functional. She had always loved it for that. She loved it for that now, in a way that was different from before, the way you love things differently when you have recently understood what it costs to have them. She pulled up her email. There were 47 new messages. She looked at the subject lines and understood that some version of the morning's events had already begun circulating. Not the details, not yet, but the shape of it, the fact of federal agents in a midtown office tower and the names attached to it. New York ran on information, and the information moved fast when it moved. She closed the email. She would deal with it in the afternoon. She opened a blank document and began writing the statement Rebecca had asked for. She wrote it in her own voice, which was direct and unornamented and did not ask for sympathy, and she wrote it the way she had spoken in the conference room, from the inside out. What she had believed, what she had found, what she had done. She wrote it in 40 minutes and read it back and changed 3 sentences and sent it to Rebecca. Then she put her head down on her arms on the desk and slept for 4 hours without dreaming. She woke to her phone buzzing. It was Rebecca, texting to say the statement had been approved, was going out through her publicist at 3 p.m., and that the board had formally moved to challenge Lucian's control position at 2:17. It was done. The legal mechanism she had embedded in the documents he signed over dinner had triggered exactly as designed. The second text was from a number she almost didn't recognize. She had to look at it twice before her tired brain assembled who it belonged to. Her mother. Her mother, who she had not called in 3 days, who had found out about the wedding cancellation through a brief voicemail Evelyn had left 48 hours ago and had been attempting to reach her since. The text said, "I'm outside your studio. I brought food. You don't have to talk. Just let me in." She went downstairs. Her mother was standing on the sidewalk on West 21st Street, holding a paper bag and wearing the particular expression of a woman who has been frightened about her daughter for several days, and has chosen to convert that fear entirely into practical action. She was 67 years old, and she had gray hair she had never dyed, and she had the same jaw as Evelyn, the same quality of held stillness, which was something Evelyn had always known and never quite registered as inheritance until this particular sidewalk, this particular afternoon, looking at the woman who had given her the jaw and probably also the stubbornness and certainly the capacity to not break when she needed to not break. "Mom," she said. Her mother looked at her face for a long moment with the comprehensive attention of someone doing an inventory. Then she held up the paper bag. "I brought soup. You look like you haven't eaten." Evelyn had not eaten in approximately 18 hours. She was not going to mention that. "Come up," she said. They ate soup at the work table in Evelyn's office, sitting across from each other, and her mother did not ask about Lucien or the wedding or the federal agents or any of it. She talked about other things: her garden, a friend's recent travel, a book she was reading. Ordinary things said in the ordinary voice of a woman deliberately creating a space of ordinary in the middle of something that had been entirely not. And Evelyn ate the soup and let the ordinary land on her, and felt something in her body begin, very slowly, to release the tension that had been living in it since a Tuesday morning in a fitting room. After a while, her mother said, "Are you all right?" "Not yet," Evelyn said. Her mother nodded. She did not push it further, which was the right response, and one that Evelyn absorbed with the specific gratitude you feel for people who understand that "not yet" is a complete answer and doesn't require elaboration. "Are you going to be all right?" her mother said. Evelyn looked at the room around her, at the 12 years of work on the walls, at the paper cup with the soup she had just finished, at her own hands on the work table, which were steady, which had been steady through all of it, which she was still quietly astonished by. "Yes," she said. The weeks that followed were not gentle. She had not expected them to be. The press coverage was extensive and not entirely in her favor in the beginning. There were narratives that cast her as naive, as complicit by proximity, as a woman who should have known the specific cruelty of hindsight applied by people who had not been inside the situation and did not intend to let that stop them from passing judgment on it. She read the coverage every morning with the same clear-eyed attention she gave to everything she needed to understand, and she did not respond to it because Rebecca had advised against it, and because she understood intuitively that responding to the wrong questions was a way of validating them. She lost 2 clients in the first month. One sent a brief, apologetic note saying they needed to minimize association with anything connected to the Moretti situation. The other said nothing, and simply did not renew. She had prepared herself for more. The 2 who left were painful in the specific way that professional rejection is always painful, not devastating, but pointed. She allowed herself to feel it for approximately 1 evening, and then put it in the category of information rather than injury and moved forward. What she had not prepared for was what came from the other direction. 3 weeks after the conference room, a letter arrived at Cross Design Collective, handwritten, which was unusual enough that Arash brought it in personally. It was from a woman Evelyn had met twice, the wife of one of the investors, and it said simply that she had read Evelyn's statement and had watched the press conference Rebecca had advised her to do, and had wanted to write because she had been in a situation once where she had trusted someone completely and had discovered the trust was structural rather than real, and she had not had the vocabulary for it at the time, and reading Evelyn's statement had given her the vocabulary, and she was grateful. Evelyn read the letter 3 times. She put it in the top drawer of her desk. Over the following months, more came. Not many. This was not that kind of story, the kind that generates a flood of public response. It was quieter than that. But they came steadily, from people she knew and people she didn't, and they said variations of the same thing, and she read each one and kept each one, and did not respond publicly to any of them, but she kept them because they were telling her something she was still in the process of learning to believe. That what she had done had mattered to people who had needed someone to do it. Leah Mercer entered a witness protection arrangement through Rebecca's coordination with the federal process. The baby, a girl born in February, named Clara, entered the world in a hospital in a city Evelyn was not told the name of, which was appropriate and right, and Evelyn received the news through Rebecca with a feeling that was complicated and honest and defied the simple language of either forgiveness or anger. She wished the child well. That was real. The rest she was still working through, and she had decided that working through it was allowed to take as long as it took. Lucian's trial began in the spring. Evelyn testified over 2 days. She sat in the witness box and answered questions from the prosecution and then from the defense. And the defense did what she had expected them to do, which was to suggest at every angle that she had known more than she claimed, that her good faith was performance, that the woman who had so thoroughly documented his crimes must have been inside them to know them so well. She answered every question in the same clear, direct voice she had used in the conference room. She answered without anger and without performance and without anything except the truth. And the truth was thorough enough that the defense's suggestions didn't take root in the room. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in May. Guilty on 7 counts. She was in her office when Rebecca called to tell her, and she said thank you and ended the call and sat for a while at her desk without doing anything in particular. There was no satisfaction in it. She had thought there might be, and there wasn't. What there was instead was something quieter. A kind of settling, the way a structure settles after something large has moved through it, finding its new configuration. It was over. In the ways that things like this are ever over. She went back to work. The Cross Foundation announced its first grant cycle in September, 8 months after the conference room. The foundation was funded by a portion of the recovered assets from the financial crimes case, allocated through a federal victim restitution arrangement that Rebecca had spent 3 months negotiating. The mandate was specific. Organizations that provided legal, financial, and practical support to individuals who had been manipulated in professional or personal relationships, who had been made instruments of someone else's ambition without their knowledge or consent. The language in the founding documents was Evelyn's own. She had written it carefully, choosing every word with the attention she gave to everything she built. And the word that anchored the mandate was not victim. It was not survivor. It was participant. People who had been made to participate unknowingly in something that used them, and who deserved help rebuilding the understanding of their own agency. The opening ceremony was held on a Friday evening at a space in Chelsea. Not her studio, a separate room, neutral ground. There were not hundreds of people there. There were 63, which was the right number for a thing that was not trying to be large before it had earned the size. She stood at the front of the room and said what the foundation was and what it intended to do, and she did not tell the story of how it came to be, because the people in the room already knew and the ones who didn't could look it up, and she was not interested in performing her own history for a crowd. What she said instead, at the end, was simpler than that. I spent 6 years building something I thought was mine. I found out it wasn't. And then I spent 72 hours trying to figure out what to do with that information. And the answer I arrived at was the same answer I've arrived at every time something I built turned out to be less than I thought it was. She looked at the room. You take what's real and you build again. That's it. That's the whole of it. The building is the thing, not what you were building toward, not the destination you had in your head, but the act of it, the fact of it, that you are someone who builds. She paused. This foundation is what I built next. I hope it helps you build next, too. Afterward, people spoke to her. She was present for each conversation in the way she had learned to be present for things. Completely, without reservation, without one eye on the next thing. A woman who ran a nonprofit in the Bronx told her about a client who had been used as a reference and a public face for a fraudulent investment scheme for 3 years without knowing it, and what the recovery had looked like, and what support had made the difference. Evelyn listened to all of it. She asked questions. She got the woman's card and wrote a note on the back of it in her own handwriting and put it in her jacket pocket. She drove home at 10 o'clock. Not to Park Avenue. She had left that apartment the morning after the conference room and had not gone back, had sent Arash and a logistics company to collect her personal belongings while she was at Rebecca's office. She lived now in a smaller apartment on the west side, in a building that did not have her fiancé's name on anything. It was quieter. It had good light in the morning. She had chosen it in 45 minutes and had not second-guessed the choice. She changed out of the dress from the ceremony. She made tea. She sat in the armchair near the window that looked out over the street, and she held the mug in both hands the way she had held the coffee cup in the fitting salon almost a year ago, and she let the evening settle around her. She thought about the woman she had been in that fitting room, standing in ivory silk in front of a 3-panel mirror, pale and tight-jawed, and impossibly steady, recording the end of the life she thought she was about to begin. She thought about what that woman had done in the 72 hours that followed, and in the months that followed those, and she felt toward that woman, toward herself, something that was not quite pride and not quite compassion, but occupied the space where both of them lived, something plain and solid and without performance. She had made one mistake in 6 years, and the mistake was not love, because what she had felt was real even if what she felt it toward was not. The mistake was the older and simpler one of believing that because she understood people clearly, she was immune to being misunderstood in return. She had known herself well and trusted that knowledge and had not considered that a person who is skilled at reading people can still be read and used by someone who is willing to do it without conscience. She knew that now. She would not make that mistake again. Not because she had become harder or more guarded, but because she had paid for the knowledge with the specific currency of experience, and it was hers, and she intended to keep it. The tea cooled in her hands. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Friday night. A cab. 2 people laughing on the sidewalk below. The red light at the corner cycling green. She thought about the small wedding she had allowed herself to imagine, sometimes, on the edges of this year. Not the one she had planned with Lucien, not the 500 guests, and the political connections, and the carefully engineered image. Something smaller, a room with good light, 2 people choosing each other without an audience. She did not know who that other person was. She was not looking for them, which was the right place to be for now. But she allowed herself the thought without chasing it away, because she had learned in a hard year that allowing yourself to want ordinary things is not weakness. It is the evidence that you are still oriented toward a future. She set the mug down on the side table. She stretched her legs out. She looked at the ceiling of the apartment that was hers, entirely and without complication. Hers, and she thought about the work that was waiting for her on Monday morning and the grant application she needed to review before end of week and the call she had scheduled with Arash to discuss 2 new project proposals that had come in after the foundation's announcement. She thought about all the things she was going to build next. Then she closed her eyes, and the city went on outside the window, and the night was ordinary and quiet and completely, entirely her own. She slept without dreaming. In the morning, she woke early, as she always had, and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and began. That was how it ended. Not with a declaration, not with a dramatic closing of a chapter, but with the same motion she had always made. Forward. Toward the work. Toward the next thing she was going to make out of whatever materials the world had given her to work with, which this year had included betrayal and exposure and grief and legal proceedings and a foundation and 63 people in a room in Chelsea on a Friday evening who needed someone to have done what she did. She had not been destroyed. She had been taken apart and had assembled herself differently, and the new assembly was more accurate than the old one, truer to what she actually was rather than what she had agreed to be in service of something that was never real. Lucien Moretti had taken 9 years building an empire on her name. She had taken 72 hours to take it back. And now she sat in her kitchen in the morning light with her coffee and her laptop and the life she was building out of what remained, and what remained was considerable. And it was hers, and she was not finished with it, not even close.